Thank you, very kind.
Yeah, I'll let you.
Thank you for the welcome. All right, morning everyone. So, oh, the microphone. Can you hear me without the microphone? If I speak loudly, or do you need me to speak? Ooh. Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
All right, okay. I'll see how far I get. If you can't hear me, just shout "what," and I'll speak louder. So, thanks for the invite, and it's always nice to talk about coding. Particularly if I get to talk a little bit about myself as well, it's one of my favourite subjects. So for the next half an hour or so, I'm going to do my best to convey a little bit about what's involved in coding and get you set up for next week's hackathon. So when you turn up, we're not thinking about what is coding, what is programming, what's involved. We can get stuck in and start working with developers. So before I begin, just get a sense of how technical this audience is. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say you are on the scale of how geeky you are? Are we sort of really geeky, not very geeky-ish? Raise your hand if you would say you're over 5 on the geeky scale. Cool, okay. And that leaves about 50-50. Okay, maybe you're not owning up to it. I think geeky is actually a good thing rather than a pejorative, but there you go. So for those, perhaps for those who aren't over 5 on the geek scale, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about who we are and what we do at We Got Coders. And we are a coding school, so I won't take anything for granted, but if I say anything too jargony, just say, what the hell are you talking about, something, and I'll try and explain it. And I'll explain what coding is. And there's a lot of misconceptions about it, so I'll just give you a brief overview so you can sort of know where to start. And I think maybe the question you guys need to know as people coming into this hackathon is, how much of this do I really need to know? I mean, what can I just get started with in order to go and work with developers and make a meaningful contribution in a very short space of time, which you will have next week. And of course, because we come from an educational background, I want to say a couple of things about how you can educate yourselves. And I think these days, coding is almost like a new form of literacy. You know, if you're completely oblivious to how web sites work and web applications work, then you're really on the back seat. And so there are plenty of good resources out there, and I'll throw some at you so you can educate yourselves as well. So just to begin with, a little bit about us. We are a web consultancy who specialise in training web developers, and we run countryside retreats at our magnificent watermill location in Bedfordshire. I've just come from there this morning. Beautiful trees and swans and ducks and serenity and peace. It's the complete opposite of London chaos and traffic that I had to experience on my way in. And what we do is we have hand-on lessons where we do coding. Telly, can you read that? We do code. And think, oh my God, it's code. Isn't that really hard? Isn't that really complicated? But here's some code. How hard could it be? If I had to define what we do at We Got Coders, well, for 12 weeks, what we do is we study new topics, including HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Ruby. And at the end of that process, we return new developers who are job ready. Now, that English statement, if you juggle it around a little bit and you formalize it and you put it into specific tokens, which even a computer could understand, you end up saying like this. Does anyone know what computer language this is written in? Python. Python? Yeah, good guess. Very close.
Ruby.
Ruby, yeah.
It is Ruby up there.
Oh, that's a good big clue, yes, there we go. But it also says JavaScript there, but it's not JavaScript, it's actually Ruby.
It's not.
And there's one of the things about Ruby is it's very elegant, it's very concise, it almost reads like English. It doesn't have to be the noughts and ones that get characterized as web developers. And one reason why we teach Ruby is it's very easy to pick up. It's very minimalist. And the guy who invented Ruby is a Japanese chap called Mats. And his motivation for creating Ruby was to foster what he called programmer happiness. And the idea was that if you have a happy workforce who like doing what they're doing every day, they're going to be more productive, they're going to be more creative and more imaginative. And I find that's very true. So we try and take this philosophy of the minimalist Zen philosophy and we put it into what we do is our consultancy side of the business, but also our training as well. So for that reason, you're going to find lots of developers who are coming into programming for the first time. They might be coming on to hackathons who know Ruby, but they'll also know HTML, JavaScript, Python, and things like that as well. Our approach is very hands-on. This is our classroom. I don't know what your classrooms at LBS are like, but we go for the sofa approach. I'll stand up and talk about coding for a little bit. And we create an environment that's very comfortable and relaxing. We want people to be calm and focused rather than stressed and agitated. And we have, as I say, a beautiful countryside location where we get away from it all, lots of peace and tranquility. We provide accommodation for all our trainees, so there's no commute. Imagine that. The daily commute is rolling out of bed in the morning and go and make yourself some tea and coffee. We have ensuite bedrooms, we have a games room, we have meals that cook by on-site chef, we have desserts, we have our linen done by a hotel company. So basically we just live, sleep and eat code, and we don't do pretty much anything else other than that. And we just create an environment where we can just be creative and not have to really worry about all the other stuff. So when you make developers feel relaxed and happy, I think they become more productive. So bear that in mind when you're at the Hackathon next week. If you're making them kind of stressed and agitated, saying, "We're going to need this right now," they're going to be more anxious and less productive as they might have been otherwise. So try your best to accommodate them and make them coffee and give them a massage or something. We also go to hackathons. So this was us at the NSVC hack last year. Did anyone hear about this? The Sexual Violence and Conflicts hackathon over at the Excel Centre. Quite high-profile engineer Jolie and William Hague sponsored it and walked around and things. But so we go to these sort of events occasionally. We take our trainees down there. We provide mentoring and support for them as well. So we have a little bit of experience in hackathons, and we're very happy to be involved with the LBS hackathon this time around. So I'm just going to try and impart some of my own 2 pence of opinion on how we can work together more effectively during that process. So what is coding? What is it? We know there's a lot of it about, isn't there? But I mean, apart from a very dry definition, like, oh, it's a set of instructions that you give to a central processing unit, which is true, but doesn't really mean very much. Coding is much, much more than that. And I think that if I had to try and define it, well, I had to try and define it because I'm doing talking. It's not just one definition. There's a lot of misconceptions about it too, but I mean, I find this idea of just saying it's writing loads of instructions, it's something that geeks do, it's not really hitting the mark. It's actually very, very creative. And when you're coding, you are trying to invent an ingenious way of making a computer, which is very stupid, do something very, very complicated, difficult, and imaginative. So the sort of people that you're going to need on your hackathon teams aren't just the sort of closed off, genius type people. Necessarily, you need people who are open-minded and can come up with creative problem-solving solutions. So I think if any of you are wondering, well, maybe I could be a coder, I don't know, but I don't know if I'm clever enough or something. I think it's actually more about creativity. Are you a problem solver? Can you find a novel way of arriving at a goal you hadn't anticipated? And if that sounds like you, then you could well be a coder. But a lot of people I know are creative are actually, they're much more they look more like rock stars than coders, actually. I mean, it's you go to one of these Ruby conferences or Python conferences and they look like skaters to me, but they're very creative people. But it's very complex as well. So don't just assume that because you've asked them to make a website and you've explained it very clearly what you want, and you said, well, it's just like Facebook, or it's just like Twitter, just use that as an example, that they can understand what you're asking them to do. Coding is very complex. I mean, I've been coding for over 10 years and I'm still learning. I still make mistakes. There's still some days where I feel like I'm hopelessly lost. It's quite common for a professional programmer to spend days on a problem that he's encountered. So it can be very complex, but it doesn't have to scare you off either. You just have to be realistic about your expectations and not overburden yourself and others with your get-rich-quick schemes, and you've only got 48 hours to do them in, so bear that in mind. And it's changing all the time. What I know now will be obsolete in about 2 years' time or less. I mean, obsolete, not even like, well, you could do it that way, I suppose, but it's a bit old-fashioned. It's like, no, it's gone. So, I mean, one of the approaches we take at We Got Coders is we don't just do teaching. So we're not like, with respect to academia, sort of stuck in a lecture theatre forever and ever. We actually go out into industry and we keep our skills sharp by seeing what teams are doing at the forefront of web development, but it does change a lot as well. So when you're, in terms of how you're planning your products and how you're planning your business, bear in mind that you need something which has longevity, but also has to have that flexibility to change in 12 months' time. Because in 12 months' time, there's going to be something new and cool and exciting, which is going to help get your product to the next stage, which you haven't even thought of yet, or don't know about now, or isn't really accessible yet. I think more than that, I would say it's actually more like a lifestyle. Coding is the idea that you can just imagine something and then put it into effect. And there's not many other businesses which are like that, really. I mean, I'm not very good at woodwork, right? I don't know how to make things with my hands. If I had this great idea for a product which needed physical materials to be put together, I wouldn't know where to begin as an engineer. I wouldn't know how to work with plastics or metals or manufacturing or anything like that. But with software, I can just go and download some cool open source free tool. I can start chipping away and building something just from my imagination. And this is a very interesting idea because as an entrepreneur, I'm sure there's many entrepreneurs in the room, you've got your idea. Rather than just doing a PowerPoint slide or a keynote slide about it, you can go and build it. And that is a very empowering skill to learn. If you put all your other business skills, your organizational skills, and your marketing skills, and whatever skills they teach you here, but then you can take the next step and go and realize it, well, that's actually very, very powerful. And I think that's this lends this idea that you don't really, you're not ever really at work, you're never really at home, you're just always creative. And so I don't see my coding skills as a job, I see it as just something that I do. Like I play keyboards, I cycle, and I like going down the pub on a Friday night. This is something you do. So it's kind of like a lifestyle. And coding really, it depends on your angle too. I mean, we specialize in web development, but there's lots of different disciplines. I don't know the first thing about making computer games. I mean, I've had a good go. We make a duck hunt clone on our course, and it's a lot of fun. Tic-tac-toe, maybe. But if you've got any gamers in, anyone play games here? You admit to it, yeah. If you complete a computer game these days, look at the credits. It's like a film. You know, they've got hundreds and hundreds of people working on it. Very, very complicated. And their approach to coding is very, very different to what we do. I don't know much about it. Mobile apps, a very, very important growth area. But sort of people who make an iOS application for an iPhone won't necessarily know how to make an Android app for a Samsung phone. And that's kind of crazy when you think about it. But they're completely different platforms, different languages, different approaches. So when you say, can you just code this? Don't assume that because some dude or some girl knows, hey, I know a bit of Ruby, that they can then build an Android app. They might do, they might not. So coding is a very broad church. And it's very exciting, but it's also very challenging at the same time. And let's go a little bit deeper into our focus just on web apps, because that's kind of what I know helps. But I mean, if you're going to building products for this hackathon, depending on, I mean, I gather that it's more MVP sort of angle rather than, here's some amazing new hardware from some company and let's figure out how we can make the Google Glass talk to the Oculus Rift and whatever. So you're probably going to be using a web application. You want customers to come and find your product online, use it, and you become the next, WhatsApp or something. But what is a web application? I'm going to look at a little bit more detail at some of the high-level aspects of what that's involved with that process. And it's already a bit ambiguous because has everyone's wondering what's the difference between a website and a web page? And what's the difference between a web page and a web app? Well, it doesn't really matter too much, but they are built using the same tools. So I would tend to think of, say, Google Maps as being a web app, whereas I would tend to think of, say, I don't know, BBC Good Food Recipes as a website. And what's the difference? Well, they're all written in the same languages, they're written in the same tools, they're presented in the same web. But it's more about how your customers are interacting with it. Are you trying to build a website which is informative, accessible, easy to understand, easy to access, and it's just clear and concise? Are you trying to create a rich, interactive, immersive experience where your customers are using this technology and trying to get some kind of outcome? Are you trying to build Twitter, or are you trying to build Lonely Planet or something like that. And they're kind of different goals, I suppose, but don't panic too much if you can't quite decide if you need a website or web app. But you could certainly decide if you want it to be static or interactive. And so I think websites are more static and web apps are much more immersive and interactive experiences. You might have also heard this term, front-end, back-end. Has anyone heard that term before? Yeah. It's nothing to do with which way you're standing or anything like that. It's actually to do with the way that web applications are built. And I'll use website and application interchangeably from now on. The way web applications are built involves a little bit of technology on what's called the front end and a little bit on the back end. It's distributed, and that's just the way the internet works. The internet is a big network of machines. You've got lots and lots of computers in this room, and they're all connected over the internet to one another and to other machines on the web. And the bit of the web application that you actually see with your own eyes is the front end, and the bit that does all the magic behind the scenes is the back end. So I'll come on to those in a second. Similarly, this is sometimes called client and server. So this is a bit more geeky now. Yeah, has anyone heard of client server? Yeah. So client server is just saying that some portion of your web application runs on your computer, on your machine, on your laptop, your mobile phone. Some of it runs on a server, which is in the cloud somewhere. Yeah. And these clients can be things you've heard of already, like Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer. But they could be, increasingly these days, your mobile phone or Google Glass or whatever you like. But these clients are the interface between your customers and your application. So they have to look good, they have to be slick, they have to be easy to understand, easy to pick up, and easy to use. The servers, well, that's kind of your app. There's going to be some software which hosts your data, your information, your content, whatever it is you're selling is going to go on the server. So if you think of the front end for a moment, as isolated from the back end, you might find on the Hackathon team, you might want to put somebody on front end, somebody on back end. That's one approach. Maybe you want to take over the front end work and you get someone else to do the back end work. Now, if you're going to be doing the front end work, you've got to think about what the customer is seeing. So your job is to make the thing look presentable. You've got to think about how they're interacting with your site. So are you trying to make a desktop experience where you're scrolling up and down? Are you creating a tablet experience where you're swiping left to right? Are you targeting mobile users? And increasingly now, the distribution of all these devices is actually very, very flat now. It used to be, even a couple of years ago, desktop was very prevalent, mobile was just the kind of nice to have. Now mobile is, in many cases, well over half all your traffic. So if you've got a weekend, you can't target desktop, laptop, and mobile. You've got to make a choice. You've got to decide who your customers are, how they interact with your app. And there's some very big sites which already do this. You look at Instagram on your web browser, it just says go and download the app. And you think about it, that's their homepage. It says, no, go away, go and download something and come back. Because they are 100% focused on mobile. So for better or worse, that's what they decide to do. So you need to make those sorts of decisions, decide what devices you're targeting, and think about how your users are going to interact with it. Is it realistic that someone's going to be on their mobile phone filling in a registration form? Or are they going to think, oh, that's too much effort? Do I just want to be able to quickly, at a glance, tell what is the USP, what's the call to action, what am I trying to do? And that whole question is, that's a big job. And in a weekend, that might take up your whole 3 days right there. The front end is written in various languages. It can involve something called HTML, hypertext markup language, something you've used all the time without realizing it possibly. HTML is where all the content of the internet lives. So that would mean if you're going to create a web page, you're using HTML. And that's where you're going to put all of your customer messages, all of your content, all your text. CSS, cascading style sheets, is the technology that's used for presentation. So that will decide what color it is, what font to use. And your branding. What's the voice? What's the style? What's the typography? And you could just bung something in at the last minute in Google Fonts. But I mean, if you're going to do a presentation on this, and I think you've probably already heard or will hear today, that's a very important aspect of this event. You've got to make it look presentable. So knowing a bit of CSS means you can go in and tweak that aspect of your web application. And finally, JavaScript is the sort of the glue that holds it all together. It is actually a coding language. It's a sort of a step up in complexity, if you like, from HTML and CSS, because it actually makes things work, it makes things interact, functional, do things. It's actually a lot of fun, so I encourage you all to have a play around with it. But JavaScript can do things like make menus appear and disappear. They can make things scroll across the screen. You can do animations, but also you can do things like charts, real-time data visualization. The sky's the limit. And the good thing about JavaScript is there's usually lots of free things on the web you can kind of pinch and then put into your website at the last minute, hackathon, if you're feeling brave. And I don't think it's beyond any of you, by the way, to have a go at this. I mean, if you find on your hackathon team, they've got 3 of you, and you've got 1 developer, it's actually quite feasible to do a bit of HTML and CSS in the time frame. I don't see why it'd be beyond you at all. So have a go at it. Go and find out about it and see if it's up your street or not. I'll send you some resources at the end of this as well. And beyond just how it looks, the front end is actually extremely important in terms of how customers interact. So increasingly now, we've got a lot of people using screen readers, so people who've got visual impairments. They need to have text-to-voice access to your website. Accessibility is a big, big part of reaching out to more customers. Increasingly now, people don't necessarily want to be able to focus just on one screen. They've got multiple tabs, they've got their tablet, they've got their phone, they've got the desktop. If you've got something that speaks to you, that actually could be a really good way of communicating with your customers. Is it responsive? Is it going to work on multiple devices? And of course, SEO. I mean, if you can search for your site and find it, then it's not very effective. So being able to interact with the front end as a tech entrepreneur is a very, very useful thing to be able to do. On the back end, you've got all the magic stuff. Now, if you've ever used Twitter and Facebook, you've wondered, how does it know to put my friend's activity in my activity stream? Or how does it send a direct message to my colleagues, and how does it all work? Well, there's a lot of software engineering behind that. I don't know, do you do computer science here at LBS? No? Okay. So it's just magic then. We don't know how it works. Well, it's
little people, right?
Sprites within the screen. Yeah. Well, it's nothing to really be afraid of. It's just code. It's the same as the front end, but the back end code will tend to be focusing more on the interactions, the data that you're using. So they're going to be writing the code which does all your data storage, that remembers who your customers are, what they're doing, what products they've ordered, that kind of stuff. And they'll be doing things like storing the pictures that you're uploading, or they'll be logging you in or logging you out, and all the actual interactivity that you can think of involves a bit of back-end code. And I would say this is a little bit harder. So I mean, if you're thinking, I'm just going to show up next weekend and do all that from scratch, I mean, it's very ambitious. But you're probably going to have to learn some languages like Ruby, Java, C, PHP. Someone mentioned Python. You know, there's lots of them. But you probably have to go and read up and learn about them a bit more before you can do the sorts of things you've probably got in your mind. And I would encourage you to do that. But there's a bit more to it. In terms of data storage, there's various approaches you can take there as well. So you ask your developers, how are we storing data? Are we using SQL, are you using something like Mongo, or using Hadoop for big data applications? And make sure they're thinking about this. Because if you're building a tech product, and you're putting your data in the wrong storage, it's going to be very hard later down the line to sort of work with it and change it. And ultimately, your data, if you're doing user signups, that is really where your business value is. And if you look at some of these huge, obscene valuations of companies recently that have been bought and sold, quite often the justification is they've got so many users, right? They've got 1 million users or 1 billion users or whatever. Now, that billion users only exists in a database somewhere. So unless your database has been done properly, you might have had 1 billion users been and gone through your site, but they're not there anymore because you haven't stored them properly. So the data approach, the strategy there is very important too. And backend also incorporates things like email. If I want to send an email, I don't want to log in with Twitter, log in with Facebook, if I want to put a map, a Google map on my site, all these things are services provided by something called an API. And an API is a service, it's a piece of functionality which has been designed to be reused and embedded in other applications. And for hackathons, this is great because you need to have instant access to these sorts of features very, very quickly without necessarily having the time to build them. So if your idea involves, I want to find all the car parks near me and display them on a map, you probably find there's already an API that gives you car parks near you, and there's probably an API that gives you maps, and you just put them together. So your job is really to have a look at what APIs are out there, go and research your idea and see is someone already providing that data in an API, and if they are, figure out how easy is it to use. Do I need to sign up? Some of them you actually need to create a user account first. There might be a lead time on that. So if you've got this great API you want to use for next weekend, sign up for it now because they might say, well, we'll get back to you in a week, and that might be too late. Some of them have a cost attached as well. So I mean, a lot of Google services, they are free to begin with, but once you get to a certain size, you have to start paying for them. So before you come up with your business model, which relies on using Google Maps and putting a million users on it a day, have a look at their pricing and decide whether that's going to be cost effective. But these APIs are very, very prevalent. There's lots and lots of them. Go and research them and see if your business idea already could use an API. So when you come out along next week, you can say, we should be considering to use Google Maps API. We should be using SendGrid for email. We should be using OAuth for Twitter login. And that, your developer will be like, wow, you've really researched this a lot. But we're impressed, I'm sure. Okay, now if you're wondering, well, should I do the front end or the back end? Don't panic, you need both of them, and you get them sort of put together. So your teams should have somebody who's pretty good at design and voice, typography, SEO, and you should have somebody who can do all the API, Ruby, Python, HTML, CSS sort of stuff in the back end as well if you need that. So you probably need both, right? Unless you want to have a very static site which just says, hello, this is my amazing homepage, you probably need both. Now, coding can happen at various levels of interactivity, and most of the languages we're talking about now are what's called high-level languages. That is to say, they're very close to English, and that slide I showed you earlier almost read like English. But actually, when you actually make these programs work, they have to be converted into a form that a computer can understand. And ultimately, that means 0 and 1 binary. And there are various levels of abstraction away from those zeros and ones to make programs work. So obviously, we haven't sort of figured out a way of just typing zeros and ones into a keyboard. That would be very, very difficult. There would have to be billions of them, and you'd have to get them in exactly the right order for them to work, which is very, very error-prone. So over time, computer scientists have developed programming languages and techniques for writing things that are approaching English, but then get converted into noughts and ones. So if someone comes along and says, I've got an idea for a language, you could think as a business tech co-founder person, how high level is this language? Because the higher the level is, the easier it is to understand, the easier it is to work with, the easier it is to collaborate with other developers, and that effectively means productivity. The higher up this scale you are, the more productive you are. If I'm having to type in zeros and ones, I've got to type a billion of them and get them in the right order, I'm probably not going to do very much inside a weekend at Hackathon with no sleep, and I've been down the bar on a Friday night. But if I'm using a higher level language and I'm writing something close to English, then the chances are that we're going to get something done. The only trade-off here is the higher the level of the language, the more work that we need to do as computer scientists to convert that back down into zeros and ones again. So if your business idea depends on using a high-level language, there's a trade-off, which is you're more productive, but then also you're not necessarily as performant. So the lower down this stack you are, the faster your application is going to be, the more customers you can serve, but the higher up you are, the easier it is to develop and more productive your team will be. So inside of a weekend, you probably want to go to something high level. If you've got someone who rocks up and says, hey, I'm a C programmer, you might say, whoa, hang on a second, we've only got a weekend to do, that's quite a low-level language. But if you've got someone who comes along and says, hey, I know a bit of PHP, I know a bit of Python, you might be all right. But then going forwards, you're going to develop this idea and take it forward. If you're relying on a billion people, using your site a year, like Facebook, PHP is not a great choice. So there's a sort of a short-term and long-term view you've got to take as well. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little bit of an idea of what's involved in coding. Are we doing QA at the end? Yeah. Okay, well, if you've got any questions about what is coding, you didn't answer that question, ask me what it was at the end and I'll do my best to answer your question. So then I thought, well, okay, you're a bunch of MBA students, right? What do you need to know if you're going to work with some developers next weekend? What practical advice could I give you? So I put some ideas together. I would say at a bare minimum, where you should pitch your ambitions as a coder, even if you're not really interested in coding, is I think you all must learn, or ought to learn, how to mark up a basic web page. You all know how to read and write. You can do your times tables, hopefully. You can drive a car. There's a sort of certain life skills you need to have. And this is now the 21st century. The internet's not going to go away. So we need to be able to mark up a basic web page. And that means learning some HTML. And there's loads and loads of resources out there. There's loads of courses. It's something you can do in your coffee break over the next few weeks, sort of thing. And you'll find it's actually very straightforward. It's not as hard as it might seem. And that just means now you've got the ability to turn your PowerPoint slides into something which you can give to a developer and say, here's where my thought process is going. You can build your branding, your voice, your typography in the way that you want your business to come across and say, here's how I want it to look. And okay, you might get someone along who can improve it or refine it, but you are taking the initiative, you're taking control of your own shop front. I mean, if you were going to open a store on Oxford Street, you want to be involved in what the shop front looks like, what the branding looks like, what's in the shop window. That's your web page. That's your shop window. So I think you should be as interested in that as you would be how you're going to market, present physical businesses. And it's not very hard, and we can show you how as well. Furthermore, it's very useful to understand how a page is put together. Now, you're going to be doing your market research. You're going out there and you're thinking, our competitor's doing this. I want to be able to do that as well. But it'd be very, very useful if you could appreciate at least what sort of steps or what sort of technologies or how they might have actually gone about it. Because at the planning stage, the world's your oyster. The blue sky, the sky is blue and you're thinking in the blue sky and all the rest of it, outside the box and all those other cliches. But if you're trying to think outside the box and that thing is very unrealistic, you're then setting yourself up for a fall. So one thing I can show you today quickly, it takes about 2 minutes, is you can learn how to analyze the web page and start seeing how to put it together. You can say, well, how do they get their logo to look like that? Or how do they get a video to play in there? And you can start poking around with it. And really that inquisitiveness, that kind of curiosity is really what web development's all about, and everything stems from there. So I'll quickly show you that in a minute. But most importantly, how to communicate with developers, right? Because developers have got a bad reputation on communication. Traditionally, we've been accused of being taciturn, introverted, and removed. I think that cliche is long since blown over. I don't think that's true anymore, but there are certainly certain things we can do to interface well. So particularly when the stress is on next weekend, we can just get our sleeves rolled up and get going. So let's talk about markup. HTML is the content, CSS the style, okay? How easy would it be to work with HTML and CSS? And I've got, 10 minutes, so I'll try and give it like to 2 minutes, see how hard it can be. So this is Chrome. Web browser, but what I'm about to show you would work with Firefox or possibly even IE these days, and they've improved quite a lot. But these slides that I'm showing you, they're not Keynote, they're not PowerPoint, it's actually a web page. Aha, I fooled you. And I'm looking at it on the internet. So I've actually created the HTML that makes these slides. So I don't know how many of you knew this, but if you just right-click or command-click if you're a Macintosh person, you get a menu that pops up. The bottom option says Inspect Element. What Inspect Element does is it throws up a console which shows you all of the code which is used to make this set of slides. Now, at first glance, you might think, whoa, that's scary, it's code and stuff. I don't know how that works. But over time, and with a couple of tutorials, I assure you, this will make most perfect sense. It's actually very, very simple, very, very easy to understand. And this set of slides is really just a text document with what's called elements, which are denoted by angle brackets. So anything you see in this text document that's got angle brackets around it, that is an instruction to your web browser to say, don't treat this as an English word to appear in the site, treat it as a word that means something, semantically. And this angle bracket, once you've learned that, you've learned it. It's a syntax, it's easy. It's like punctuation in English. It's not very hard to understand. And a web page consists of a head and a body, just like a person does. And these tags will have certain meanings semantically, which you can just go and learn. There's resources on the web that will explain what these things do. But within the body goes all your actual content that you see, and inside the head will go all the assets that make the page look the way it does, search engine keywords, anything which will be used for the description for how it appears in Google, that kind of stuff, meta information. It tells people what language the page is written in and various other bits of information. And these slides are just a bunch of what's called section tags. So every slide you're seeing, I've just created a section element. And if I use this magnifying glass, I can actually click on this slide, and it will show me exactly where in the code this slide is. And so it's found this text basic markup, which corresponds to the title of my slide. Right? So if I double click on it, I can change it, say, hello LBS, and my page is going to update. Not hard, right? I mean, if you spent like a quarter of an hour, you probably won't figure that out. You know, it's not that difficult. And so you can, using this, it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the easier it gets. And if you kind of use this technique a lot, you can start to play around with your own websites, come up with your own ideas. And rather than sketching ideas on pen and paper, you could just start putting your own page together and give that to a developer to go and use. And it works for even more complex examples. If you want to get to that stage, you can just say, I want to edit this as HTML. And then I can start putting in my own elements in here. This is an amazing, amazing HTML element. It's amazing how badly your typing goes when you're watched by 50 people. And that's a P tag, isn't it? So the \P means this is the end of an element. And when you've got the angle brackets without the slash, it means it's the start of an element. And the way markup works, it says everything that goes between this marker and that marker will be considered to be what's called a HTML element. And I've just created an element called a P element, which is a paragraph. So when I come out of that, ding, my paragraph now appears in the page. And there are lots of these elements. You've got ones for audio to make sound, you've got ones for video to make video, you've got images, you'll have links to go to other pages, you can have figures or diagrams. There's a whole host of these things you can go and read about, and they have their own attributes, their own qualities, their own purpose. But once you get your head around this basic concept, which is markup starts with this opening tag and ends with that closing tag, that's the kind of fundamental bit, and the rest of it is just learning more specific information. On the CSS side, in the same console, you can also use this magnifying glass to click on certain elements, and if I just move that to the, here we go. There we go. And CSS is also very straightforward. It's very slightly different syntax to what we had with HTML, but CSS is where we actually can start to give it presentation details. So if I want to change, say, the color of the font, I can just provide the color attribute and then give it a color as, in this case, hexadecimal, but if you're not so up in your hexadecimal, you can just say color red. And now it's gone red. You know, not rocket science. The browser also gives you a nice little color wheel. So if I want that to be a subtly different, nice little pink there, that's actually quite nice. I like that. You can just change it. So you don't need to sort of wait on your front-end designer to say, oh, what would it look like in pink? You just try it out. And CSS lets you do things like, if I want to make it bigger, I can say, here's my font size. Make it nice and big. I can give it a border. Ooh, green, here we go. And give it some padding to make it sit off the edges. I can make the border turn into a circle using border radius. And all I'm doing is I'm experimenting with different values and I'm making it look slightly different. You can do text shadows. Say 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, blue. Oh no, one too many. There you go. 2 pixels. No, 2 pixels. There we go. So yeah, you can do. There you go. It's quite avant-garde, that, isn't it? I like that. It's not bad. But I think what I'm just trying to illustrate is it's all very logical. If I want to know what the font size is, I can set it to something. So I don't want coding to sort of be this monolithic, mysterious thing which you feel like you couldn't ever work with. It's not. It's actually a lot simpler than you might first realize. So finally, I've got a couple of minutes left. How do you communicate with developers? We try as well. It's a two-way thing, but you can also, there's things you can do to communicate with us and help us to help you. And I think one of the first things I would suggest is to try and appreciate how complex something is. If you're asking for the moon on a stick, you're just going to demotivate everybody. Even though they say, yes, we can do it, they're just being plucky or they're being brave and they don't really know how to do it. So try and have a guess at how complex it is. And this is, for example, if I gave you these 3 bits of technology: speech recognition, finding hotels are near you, and then plotting hotels on a map. Would you say that, which of these 3 things would you say is the most complex to achieve? Anyone have a guess? Speech? Finding hotels, someone said. Okay.
Depends on the API which are available.
It depends a lot on the API, right? If I had to code speech recognition in a weekend, that would mean study of phonetics, signal processing, dealing with accents. It's very, very complicated, actually. But speech recognition is actually more or less a solved problem. There's an API that Google provides where you have a JavaScript object and you can set it up so that it just picks up voice commands. It takes that signal, sends it off to Google, they process it, and then give you the results back. And it's a little bit temperamental. I mean, if we get time at the end, I'll show you it, but it's about 30 lines of code. So if you need a business idea, you want to use the hackathon, you think it'd be really cool if I could speak into it, use speech. It's really simple. It's probably simpler than the other 2, actually, because you're not actually doing the work, you're using an API. Finding hotels near you, that's also pretty simple. There are lots of APIs which do this, and they will provide that information. There's a whole plethora of them. I mean, in the end, I think that one's possibly the hardest because they'll actually put business restrictions on it, like you have to pay for it probably. Whereas the other 2, you don't have to pay for them so much. So go and have a look at what APIs are available. And if it's available, it's probably easy. And as a rule of thumb, when a developer says something's easy, that means they know how to do it. If it's hard, that means they don't know how to do it. Yet. Prioritize. What we need is good project managers one of the reasons why we got into coding in the first place is because we weren't very good at project management. We're not like manager type people. We're kind of creative. Oh, I've got this idea. I'm going to run with it. So try and prioritize things, and realize that if everything is priority one, that's not prioritizing at all. But you won't be astonished at how often that is the case. You must have this, this, and this. Okay, well that's no longer a prioritization. What's the one thing that you want to stand up there in your presentation and say, yep, that's what we're going to show? And there are various tools and things, but I don't think they're in scope for this hackathon. They're not going to get time to do a Scrum meeting and an Agile unified process diagram and flowcharts and things. I think trying to just give them some kind of deadline and say, let's have this really important feature by the Saturday night, so we've got Sunday to sort of patch things up and add to it, that's the sort of guidance I think you could give. Anything more complicated? I don't know. The chances are this is going to change very rapidly, and what is the plan now is going to change in an hour's time. So I wouldn't suggest spending too much time on project management tools, but going forwards, they're very, very important. Yeah, probably not going to time for hackathon. And lastly, KISS. You've not heard that? It's an acronym rather than a command. You can kiss them if you want. Keep it simple, stupid. I mean, I've always thought actually KISS should be keep it simple and not stupid. But anyway, keep it simple. Don't try and do something that's really, really complicated and then come to your presentation and say, oh, well, yeah, we sort of tried to do this and then we had a bit of a setback and now we've got this thing. Set out with something that is achievable and then build on it if you've got time. So focus on that key deliverable and then use your skills. We need your marketing skills to identify who the users are, how they're going to interact with the site. Use your organizational skills to set some milestones and some contingencies. What happens if you try this and it doesn't work? What could we do instead that's simpler and we could present? And use your salesy skills to inspire us, get us bought into your idea. If you sort of start saying, hey, I'm the business person, I know best, and these people are giving up their weekends too, if you sort of sell the idea, get us on board, then we're more likely to get involved. And I think that's now about it. Oh no, okay. Have I got time just to show some resources?
Of course, go ahead.
Okay. Very quickly, do's and don'ts. Do be polite, please. Don't move the goalpost without telling anybody. This happened to me at Hackathon before, where we had a meeting, so right, here's what we're going to do. All the devs went into a room for an hour and a half, and we came back to, okay, we had another meeting, we decided to do something else. Keep everyone in the loop, and I think that will avoid people getting upset. Yeah, don't play down the business person card, nobody likes that. And do be humble. If you don't understand something, just say, we'll help. And this works both ways too. When I don't understand something, it takes a lot, but be that person who puts their hand up and says, hey, I don't know what you're talking about, because that's more likely to work. And find out who your developers are. They're giving up their weekends here. What is their skill set? What are their interests? If they are coming along saying, hey, I'm really interested in using speech recognition, then don't sort of tell them, oh, well, we can't do that because our business idea is this. Find another developer who is interested in your idea. Maybe you're looking for something that's very front-end heavy, so you need a front-end person. Maybe something that's very back-end heavy, you need a back-end person. So try your best to incorporate their goals for the hackathon with your goals for the hackathon, and then you're going to get a really good team. If they're really interested in saying, I want to find a really cool way of using iOS, and say, great, let's use a mobile version of the site, and try your best to keep everyone involved. So if I've piqued your interest at all, I hope that I have, and if I want to go away this week and learn HTML and CSS, so I can come onto the hackathon and be the front-end person, yay! Here's how you would go and do it. Level 1, go and look at these resources online. These are tutorial sites that you can use in your browser. They're very, very good, and they will show you this sort of basic syntax. It will be the introduction, the sort of 101 stuff. There's Code School, Code Academy. Notice the spelling, that is actually correct. I think Code Academy was gone or something, so they call it Code Academy. Code.org, Treehouse, General Assembly have one called Dash, which is very good as well. And that's the sort of thing you can fit in your coffee break, 15 minutes here and there, you're getting the syntax. Once you get to that point, I mean, this is probably for the future rather than for next week. I think level 1 is great for next week. But then when you've realized, look, this is fantastic, I'm really enjoying this, how do I do more? Then from there on, you can go and look at sites like Project Eula, which is a list of programming challenges. There's Coder Wall, where you can see tips others are leaving. Stack Overflow for asking questions and getting answers. And there's very good sites that do screencasts, where they have people who talk you through in a video how to make progress. There's one called Linda. There's loads of them. And once you know where you want to specialize, there are specialist sites as well. Once you've done all that, come and speak to us. We'd love to speak with you and see if you can get one of our training programs. There are sort of documents out there which will explain how to make progress, but if you're realistically at that level, we should be speaking, and we can help get you to the next point and make you that tech co-founder you've always wanted to be. All right, any questions? Yeah.
You were talking a lot about APIs.
Yes.
Is there a good resource that aggregates API, or at least indicates what API might be out there?
Yeah. So if you, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there is a couple of sites which do API sort of directory. I mean, my specialty is something called Ruby, and a thing called Ruby Toolbox, which says here's all the sort of libraries you can use, and here's what's available. But yeah, a bit of Google is the best resource ultimately, because all these directories, they come and go, they get clogged up, and they change. If you Google speech recognition API, you're going to get on the first page all your options really. Yeah.
I can tell you there is a resource called mashshade.com that is
right.
It's like a directory for you.
Cool. Check it out. Anything else? Yeah.
So in the hackathon, we're going to have a bigger team than usually, 5 to 6. Is there any difference in advice you would give us, given that we're more
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, there's this phrase, too many cooks spoil the broth. If you've got like 3 or 4 different developers, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be 4 times as productive as a team got 1 developer, actually, because you've got human factors. They're not necessarily all using the same languages. So you've got to ask yourself, if you've got 4 devs in your team, or 3 devs, who's doing the front end, who's doing the back end? Are they using the same languages? Have you got one person who wants to go this way, one person wants to go that way? Yeah. So try and, when you're building a team, that's when I think you win and lose the hackathons, when you build the team. So go and have a coffee with everyone, say, what are you into, what are your interests? Are you front end person, back end person, what languages do you know? And then try and nick the people who you think are going to be needed. Anything else? All right, thank you very much. Thank you.